I'm Pascal from Acurast. Maybe let's do kind of morning gymnastics because apparently 11 a.m. is early for some people. So who here has heard of interoperability? Let's raise our hands if you know it. Good. If you would associate interoperability with cross-chain communication. Okay, interesting. And who has heard of universal interoperability? Cool, very cool. So I can ask someone from you to come up here and talk to us about this? Okay, good. No, so in general, when I'm talking about universal interoperability, what we mean by that is a more holistic perspective to interoperability. Obviously, like a lot of you have raised your hands for cross-chain communication, so interoperability being described in the Web3 space in that regard. But the universal aspect to it zooms a bit out of the whole thing and looks essentially towards integrating more than just the Web3 ecosystems themselves. But what do I mean with that? If we look essentially at the current Web3 space, we see a lot of these planets that are made up of various ecosystems. Essentially, a lot of layer ones that have a lot of developer activities on them. Most of them are very well funded, but one of the main challenges that we are seeing at the moment is, yes, the interoperability between these ecosystems is not really given. So there's no native way to communicate essentially with these other Web3 worlds. We have obviously Polkadot that charges forward there with having these parachains where you have an XCM standard that allows these protocols to communicate with each other. Similarly, on the Cosmos side of things, there is also a standard that wants to achieve this, but this does not go outside of these specific ecosystems, right? So you have no inherent way of communication between the Polkadot side of things to Cosmos or from the EVM chains like Ethereum, Polygon, and Optimisms into these ecosystems. Besides that, what we also have been seeing is that if we look at kind of the legacy Web 2 worlds, a lot of dApps still rely on these, for example, public APIs that bring in price feeds or computation that is being made off-chain. So you still have not an as accessible way of integrating the legacy Web 2 world into the Web 3 world. And then looking a bit more forward towards like emerging technologies in the AI space, but also IoT, these are not really natively accessible in the Web 3 world. And for us, on the Acurast side, what we see is that this creates a huge opportunity, right? If you can solve this problem of interconnecting this world with each other and being able to populate this Web3 universe with these ecosystems that have a lot of developers in them and have a way to essentially inherently interconnect them with each other. So having essentially Acurast as the layer that enables the Web 2 world to be brought into the Web 3 world, but also simultaneously using the same underlying layer for essentially message passing between various Web 3 ecosystems. So this is something that we're striving with Acurast to build a way, a layer that is accessible for developers that essentially allows you to do this. And if we are looking into this, you probably ask yourself, okay, this sounds like a lot, right? So it's not only that you're looking to solve the Oracle use case, which in some ecosystems have like very big players in them. But it's also cross-chain communication that you're looking at solving this, and even you have the vision of looking into these emerging technologies, right? And we have looked at this from a way of a developer, and we said, look, what we need is essentially a main component that can make this happen, which is off-chain computation, because all of these use cases can be essentially built on top of something like that. But it also needs to be an open system, right? Without a centralized party being involved in the middle, kind of playing the gatekeeper. So lowering the entry barriers for developers is immensely important when it comes to getting access to a solution like this. And that's why we looked at how can we lower these entry barriers on the two sides of the coins, right? So you will always have a project that has a need for a way to do these cross-chain interactions or these Web 2 interactions. So you have one side of the coin is essentially the developer, right? They have a request that they need to have fulfilled. And on the other side, you have the off-chain workers that are essentially bringing the supply side of this. And when we looked at a way to build up the infrastructure side of things, so this centralized network essentially of computational resources, we ended up with mobile devices being the perfect first step essentially to help us achieve that, right? Because we want in the end as much as possible decentralized system of these off-chain workers. So is a server, for example, that has to be housed in a highly secure server room with entry access and everything like that, is this the most accessible hardware for making this happen? Probably for some cases that might be true, but what we think is that mobile devices essentially are the perfect thing, right? So if you think about it, they're very accessible. You can get, for example, an Android phone in almost every country of the world. They're very affordable. Obviously depends on the country in the end, right? But you have like a Google Pixel 3a that you can get around for 200 or 250 USD. So the entry hurdle on that is way lower than if you would have to invest into like a server that racks up thousands on the other side. But not only in terms of the accessibility, this is a factor. What also plays a role is essentially the security of the whole aspect. What Acurast leverages on these mobile devices is this little hardware security module that is found on these mobile phones and is currently being leveraged for things like mobile banking, also for crypto wallets. So the secret that you use essentially to access these applications are stored within these modules. And this is also allows us to leverage these kind of things, right? Because on the security aspect, these mobile devices are inherently portable, right? Which is already in the name. Every one of us carries around one of these, and if we leave it in a train or if it even gets stolen, we don't directly jump to the conclusion, oh no, now all my funds on my e-banking account and my crypto wallet are completely gone because someone got the device into their hands, right? And this is being enabled through these hardware security modules, and on Acurast we are essentially leveraging these for the off-chain computational part of things. and having these requests essentially from developers being run within them. That being said, there's also the additional question, right? How can you essentially incentivize a network to be built up? Why would I essentially buy one of these mobile devices to participate on the Acurast side? And the answer is there essentially that you will earn rewards when you do this, and it's not the Acurast protocol that pays for these rewards, but it's essentially the other side of this supply and demand aspect. So the developer in this case that pays for the access to these resources. So with that, what we can build up is a truly decentralized network of computational resources. And we've already started to do this. So we have around like 60 active devices at the moment. And the interesting thing there is that the user group that essentially supplies these resources through these devices is completely kind of all over the place. So you have individuals, just like kind of enthusiasts that are getting these phones, even some in bulk that have like 5 phones at home that are essentially running these, or you have enterprises that are interested to use such an approach essentially to provide resources to get a first step into the Web3 space. So this is the one side of this system that we're building on Acurast. Now you might have kind of asked yourself, okay, this is interesting in terms of you have this network, but how can you fulfill these use cases, right? How can you say, okay, you can bring in Web 2 data and computation, you can essentially leverage the same infrastructure for cross-chain communication, and then even have things place essentially in the AI or IoT aspects. And the answer goes back essentially to having these resources being built up completely decentralized, having a way to build up like a modular approach at interoperability, focusing with specific modules that enable then the developers essentially to say, okay, this is the enterprise module that focuses on calling public or permissioned APIs that do computation. And this is the hyperdrive module that essentially allows the cross-chain communication. And if we drill down a bit deeper into these modules, specifically the first two, in terms of use cases, what you can see emerging on the enterprise side of things is the specific Oracle use case, right? So you have a DeFi lending platform, for example, that needs access to public price feeds, right? Price feeds that are coming from exchanges, like the Bitcoin price in the US dollar, for example. You might have an NFT or GameFi platform that says, okay, we need verifiable randomness because that's very hard to do on the blockchain, or even impossible without anyone essentially compromising this. So we need to have a way of doing verifiable random numbers for deciding the outcome of our roulette game, for example, or deciding the attributes that go into an NFT. So you can leverage essentially as a developer this module to then have the answers or these requirements being executed on a given number of these off-chain workers, and then the off-chain workers will provide essentially the result in the environments that I'm essentially working on as a developer. So you have a very specific kind of focused, the underlying infrastructure is always the same. So it's not that because you can see now 4 different areas on here that Acurast focuses on 4 different projects, but it's essentially leveraging this off-chain worker infrastructure layer all the same for all of these use cases. And probably the question comes now, okay, so we have this decentralized network, right? But do you or do I as a developer have to go to the Acurast guys and ask them, hey, now, so I really want one of these price feeds for my project. Can you please help me do this, right? And it shouldn't be that way, right? It shouldn't be that you have a centralized party essentially gatekeeping the access to this network in the end, right? It should be a way that a developer essentially can define their requests and being matched with the off-chain workers on the other side. And that's the case, so this is kind of the second piece of the puzzle that comes into play. It's this marketplace essentially that brings together the demand from developers with the supply from the processors on the other side. And on this marketplace, you have a way for them, so for a consumer, that's how we call it in the Acurast world, essentially someone that has a request for interoperability being matched with processors. Processors themselves, which are the off-chain workers, when they do the onboarding process, they essentially connect and register themselves or their resources on the marketplace, and they say, hey, these are the resources that I can offer. I'm willing to start accepting requests from the consumer side. And when we take a look at how we want to make this accessible, this is one of the ways that you can start interacting with it. So we have here what we call the Acurast console, and this is kind of the first stepping stone for a developer to get into requesting resources. And what we can see on top, maybe not really, but I can tell you what it should show. So you have the way to select the protocol, so the destination. And the important part here is we want to be as inclusive for developers as possible, right? So you can be a developer that builds on Astar in a WASM environment, or a developer that builds on Moonbeam in an EVM environment. Or you could be a parachain that natively requires things like price feeds, for example, right? Or it could also be a chain outside of the Polkadot ecosystem, like Tezos, Cosmos, and others. So you're essentially going onto this console as a developer and say, okay, hey, I need my requests going to Astar, to my Astar WASM contract. I select this in this UI, and then I create essentially my request. And the request is also structured with accessibility in mind, which means that you have this completely generic way of defining things, right? So you can say, I have a use case that is now a betting platform for the football match, and I need essentially the results of a football game. You can just go ahead and define this essentially in JavaScript, and then you can create this request that is being then matched with the processors. So here you have the complete flexibility essentially to define what you want to have executed on these devices. And this is very powerful if you think about it, right? Also here, it's not that there is only a specific feeds, if you think about price feeds, right? That we on the Acurast team control and guide you into it and tell you, hey, you can only use as assets X, Y, and Z, but it's you then essentially, or the developer that is in the driver's seat to define all of their requirements and then have them run. We have already started with some templates, so the basic things and the projects that we are working on now on this enterprise module is that we're seeing price feeds is in high demand for projects, or verifiable randomness, but in the end you can go ahead and build whatever you want. Afterwards, essentially what you define on this marketplace is the details, right? So you have now said, I'm building on Astar in my WASM environment. This is my WASM smart contract that wants to receive the outputs, and this is my script that I want to have run. Now it comes towards defining, okay, I need 5 processors that process this, because I want to have essentially the added security that comes with it. Because I could run it on one processor, right? But the outcome could be that this processor goes offline for whatever reason. So I probably, in a production environment, would want to have multiple ones for essentially added certainty of receiving an answer. Maybe to mention on that point that I didn't before, on the processor side, on this off-chain worker side, this trusted execution environment that we have looked at gives us a proof of execution. So we know that the script that we have seen before, written by a developer, is being executed without the off-chain worker manipulating it. So we have a certainty on that side, right? It's completely provable what happens on the computational side of the device, and then the result is being put onto my defined destination. But going back to the defining of this job request is essentially then you also say, okay, I not only need 5 processors, but I need my script to be executed from tomorrow until the end of the year, and I need an interval of 15 minutes, for example. So you have then, after the matching has happened, 5 of these processors that every 15 minutes execute your job and provide the outputs where you've defined. And then the additional point here is that I, as a developer, if I want to access the resources of these processors, am the one that are paying is paying for it, right? So it's not that there is a way that these processors are incentivized only through the native Acurast token, but it's actually the marketplace in effect where the consumer of these things is paying for the resources they are accessing. When that is defined, you essentially publish the job, and then onto this marketplace, there the matching happens. So you have this request for the 5 processors that is being matched, and in the end you have the output of the script with this proof of execution that lands onto your, in this example, Astar WASM smart contract, where you can use it for your DeFi platform that you're building, for example. So you have a way to kind of completely self-service, if you want to call it like that, to access these resources that are completely decentralized for these various modules of interoperability. Cool, awesome. So this is kind of a first look on the Acurast side. If you're interested to try it out, you can start running a processor. So if you might have an Android device at home that is only in your drawer collecting dust, go ahead, go to console.acurast.com. You will see a login with a Polkadot account. You will then be greeted with a QR code that you scan with this device, and within 5 minutes you're onboarded and active in the set of processors. On the project side, if you're interested to start looking into the screenshots that you have seen before, is on the console.acurast.com, and there you can start playing around with kind of, testing use cases out if you need price feeds, whatever. More details on all of these modules and everything on that side is on docs.acurast.com. And obviously, yeah, feel free to follow us on Twitter and join our social media channels. So that was a long monologue. I can see a question in the back. No? Okay, good. Very good. Then one in the front.
So, as a developer, if I want to access to a parachain that is not listed on the 2 previous slides, what should I do?
Yes, so that's a very good question. Thanks for asking that. So there are various ways of integrating Acurast as a destination. So if you have essentially a parachain without an EVM or WASM environment, you can use the Acurast palette as this destination, right? If you have an EVM or WASM environment, what you can do is utilize specific destination contracts that are getting the answers. And the first step of if you're a new parachain and you want to utilize this is you can look at the docs and kind of figure out which way of integration you would like. And then on that step, at this stage, you need to come to us and help you essentially being set up on the marketplace. And then this marketplace can point towards the destination on your site. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
I have actually there's no one else. I also want to ask about the price data and where are you getting it? Like how many places are you getting the data? And also how are you making sure that it's up to date?
Yes, that's also a very good question. And the answer there is not that we are essentially giving you a requirement where these prices are being fetched from. So what I mean by that is that you can define essentially these are prices that come from 5 of these centralized exchanges, or this is a price point that comes from a DEX, and this is what you're essentially defining on the on this JavaScript that we have seen. So the request of this job. So it's essentially you being able to say, okay, I want to have. If we talk about public APIs, I want to have it from Coinbase, Parachain, Binance, maybe, I don't know. So it's you essentially as a project or developer that is in the driver's seat. That being said, what we're going to launch is kind of a common good feed that will be in environments such as Astar or Moonbeam that are essentially giving you the answers for like top 10 ecosystem coins or top 10 global coins as well. So in these environments, we will have a way to have it more easily as well for developers that they don't necessarily have to define the requirements and start testing and playing around with it.
And when are you launching it?
Sorry?
When are you launching that part?
So you can already use it now. The marketplace is on testnet at the moment. We have a Kusama slot where we're going to launch the Canary network, but the processors, they're fully capable already to communicate and execute this job. As a matter of fact, it's being used in production already by some of the projects.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Cool. If there are no more questions, then thanks. I hope I didn't bore you that much with my monologue, but yeah.